It's a hot summer day, about 35 degrees Celsius, and you're waiting for the bus at this bus stop. You can feel the heat radiating off the bitumen below you. You can hear the rustle of air, wind going through the grass behind you. Every time a truck goes past, you get a gust of hot air and diesel fumes to the face. You can feel your arms burning and your mouth's getting dry. You're starting to get dehydrated. Every now and again, you try and stand in the slice of shade provided by the bus stop pole, but to be honest, it's not doing much. Now imagine doing this on a 40-degree day. Your body will be sweating hard trying to cool itself. Your clothes might be sticking to your body. Now imagine trying to do it on a 45-degree day, on a 50-degree day. At temperatures like that, you're at risk of heat stroke, heat exhaustion, illness, or death. All of us are going to be impacted by longer and hotter heat waves in the future, but it's our most vulnerable who are going to be impacted most. What's it going to feel like in our homes and in our streets? It could feel like sleepless nights and bleary, uncomfortable days. It could feel like worrying about whether you can afford to turn on the air conditioning. It could feel like taking your kids to the shopping centre down the road, the only cool building near your house, where you'll slip inside the walk-in freezer just to feel a moment of relief. It could feel like working outside under heavy safety equipment, feeling faint, or it could feel like standing, waiting for the bus under a burning sun, feeling yourself getting exhausted. Our organisation, Sweltering Cities, works directly with communities in our hottest suburbs to campaign and advocate with people for more livable, equitable, sustainable cities. And one of our campaigns this summer is to win great accessible bus stops, bus shelters, across all the hottest suburbs in Sydney. This bus stop is in Erskine Park, which is near Penrith in Western Sydney. These are some of the suburbs which will reach catastrophically high temperatures. Already in 2020, Penrith reached 48.9 degrees in January. It's also some of the same suburbs where less than 25% of the bus stops have any shelter at all. And I can tell you, I've become a bit weirdly obsessed with bus shelters, and I thought that this would make me really boring at parties. But weirdly, every time I tell people about this, they say, oh yeah, last time I was waiting for the bus, there was no shelter. I got soaked in the rain, or I was exhausted and sweaty by the time I got to work. And right now, you might be thinking of the last time you caught a bus. You might be thinking about when you were a kid waiting for the bus. Or you might be thinking about your neighbour, or your grandparents, or someone you know that doesn't have a choice about whether they get to catch the bus or not. And I guess this makes sense because the reason why I'm really interested in bus shelters is because of a story I heard. A few years ago, I spoke to a woman called Amanda. She had her baby daughter, Harriet. She was the second baby born in 2009. Really, really early in the morning. And Amanda has epilepsy, so she's not allowed to drive. So she would take baby Harriet strapped to her chest. She was living in Penrith at the time. Baby Harriet would be strapped to her chest and she would go and wait for the bus. And on really hot days, she could feel her body temperature rising. And she was worried about the safety of her baby as they went to the hospital to get checked. And no one should have to wait with their baby strapped to their chest, being anxious about their safety. This is why we are mapping the terrible bus stops of Sydney in order to show what this problem is. This is the same bus stop. This isn't just a problem of equity and social justice. This is also a problem of sustainability. Transport is the third largest source of carbon emissions in Australia, and cars are responsible for roughly half of that. We hear a lot about electric vehicles as the solution, but if we're going to transition and decarbonise at the rate that we need to, if we're going to build the fantastic net zero cities of the future, then we need to be transitioning to public transport. Optimistically, it's going to take decades to reach an all-electric vehicle environment. But what we need is to make sure that catching public transport is accessible, is safe, is enjoyable, and is convenient. This area, Erskine Park, is an urban heat island. Urban heat islands are areas where there's treeless streets, There's lots of concrete, dark surfaces. It attracts the heat and holds it. So they're hotter during the day and hotter during the night. Think of it as the difference on a hot day between standing in a car park with the sun blazing down on you or standing in a nice park under a tree. That's the sort of difference we're seeing. You might be thinking of the new suburbs at the edges of some of our cities, where we've got lots of concrete, dark roofs, not a lot of trees. I was speaking to someone the other day who lives in Jordan Springs in Western Sydney, and he said that he'd love to have a tree in his yard, but it's such a small area, he fears that if he puts one in, it's going to be like it's in tree jail. So what can we do about this? People have come to our organisation with 4 key themes for solutions. The first is safer, better homes. That means building more energy efficiency for thermal comfort so we're warm in winter and cool in summer. Recently, the federal government has decided to increase the standard of our homes up to 7 stars, which is fantastic to see. But in Victoria, for example, the average star rating for homes is only 1.8. So where 0 is basically a tent and 10 is good news. Means you can keep cool and warm without a lot of effort. So that means we need to be retrofitting as well. The second big theme is infrastructure. So lots of trees, blue infrastructure, which is canals, ponds, things like that, and also great public transport, schools that keep people safe, things like that. The third is services, making sure that our vulnerable community members, people are checking on them when it's hot, and also there's heat shelters that people can go to. Think of it as, at the moment, people go to the movies on hot days. I remember when Lord of the Rings came out over summer, and The Hobbit, and those movies were really long. So you could see them. You could go to the midday session and keep cool for hours. It's things like this, but making it more formal. Maybe someone else here has also done that. And the fourth question is justice. So people want more of a say in how their cities, how their communities, how their buildings are constructed, and they want lots more information about it as well. But there's governance issues on this. For example, with bus shelters, if they're on small roads, then they're local government. If they're on big roads, then they're state government. There's some bus stops where there's seats and no one knows quite who put them in or how they got there. And then there's also the fact that advertisers own a lot of the infrastructure and get to say like what the accessibility levels are, where they are, and prioritise advertising often over sustainability. We see the same problems with trees. Because it's one thing to plant a tree, but who's going to look after it? Whose job is that if someone plants a tree on your street? Is it your job to look after it? We know that trees increase our quality of life. They cool our suburbs. We know that leafier streets, houses on leafier streets can be up to 20%. So houses on slightly leafier streets can be $20,000 more valuable than similar houses on less leafy streets. They can cool local areas by multiple degrees. They increase in biodiversity, so birds, possums, even koalas that live in our trees and the other species we share our cities with. So basically I'm saying, trees can be really good news. But how and why do we measure tree cover? You guys might have seen in the news sometimes announcements like, we're going to plant 5,000 trees, we're going to plant 10,000 trees, we're going to plant 1 million trees. Wow. And those numbers sound really impressive, and New South Wales has recently almost completed planting 1 million trees in Sydney. But at the same time as that's been happening, there hasn't been a really big increase in the amount of green cover in the city. Because they're not counting the trees that are being taken away during that time. And you might take away a couple of big trees and plant 4 smaller ones, and you're not going to see an increase in green cover. And so that's why we need to be measuring the green cover in an area, so we can also see equity. What suburbs are cool and leafy, what suburbs aren't. This isn't just an Australian issue. Cities in Australia and the US, lots of them were built around cars. Think lots of highways, built around streets, not those little alleyways you might see in Europe or other places. This is a suburb in Houston. It's not far from some leafy, wealthier neighbourhoods. This is a poorer neighbourhood. You can see, I think it only has a small percentage of tree cover. On hot days in Houston and lots of other cities, people put on their air conditioners and results in an increase in pressure on the power grid. And if power does go out, it's these sort of suburbs where it's hotter, where the housing is worse quality, where people are at a bigger risk of heat-related disease. It might surprise you to know that heat waves are the most deadly environmental disaster, both here in Australia and in the US. They kill more people than all other disasters combined. So where have we got to at this point? These are big problems. They need really big solutions. How can we wrap our heads around transforming our cities? Because it covers everything. It's how safe our pets are, it's what how our kids learn, it's what happens in our workplaces. What are we going to do? It sounds huge. Here we go. Last summer, Sweltering Cities did the biggest ever community survey on heat, health and homes ever in Australia. We asked more than 2,100 people around the country from every state and territory, from almost 700 postcodes, how they feel the heat and what they want us to do about it. We found that almost half of everyone we surveyed think that the way their suburb is built increases heat. And I wonder if it's the same in this room. We found that 3 in 10 people are leaving their homes to go to a cooler location during heat waves. And that for people who own their home, that's about 15%, but for renters, it's 50%. We found that 1 in 8 people are seeking medical care or have sought medical care during heat waves because of the mental and physical health impacts. We also found that 80% of people around the country think that more trees is a solution. It was the top solution anyone selected. We also found, and we did some localised results, the biggest number of results came from Penrith in Western Sydney, just near where that bus stop was that I showed you, and that 2/3 of people in Penrith want better bus stops. So what have we got? Different types of information. We've got the personal stories of people like Amanda, of you and I, and what it feels like to either be drenched in a La Nina summer or to be standing there waiting on a 40-degree day in the sun on a bus stop. So we've got those personal stories. We've got the data from the survey. So what do lots of people think? What do lots of people want? And we've got the maps. We've got the big data that can show us the scale of the problem. Because if we look at a problem with just about one person at a time, then the solutions will be individual. We're going to tell people, you've got to get a car and drive, you've got to put a wet towel on the back of your neck. These are individual solutions. But if we only look at the big data, at the maps, then we might not understand the detail of how people feel at these bus stops, about how people feel on their streets. So what we want to do is understand the problem through personal experience, but think about the scale of solutions using the data. Think about how we can transform our cities, how we can have greener, more accessible, more sustainable, more beautiful cities. There we go. I've spoken to people across Australia's hottest suburbs about their ideas for the cool, sustainable cities and the great bus stops of our future. Ideas like making sure all of our schools are really safe to learn in and for kids to play in during the day. Ideas like heat shelters that we can make sure people can get to during the day. I heard the other day someone said, let's have midnight laps on local pools so on hot nights people can go there. These ideas were from a meeting in Blacktown where we asked people, just write an idea that you have and put it on a poster on a wall. One of my favourite ones recently is people mentioned, let's get self-driving vans, self-driving cars that can go around suburbs and pick up vulnerable people on a hot day and take them somewhere cool. And I sort of like that idea of lots of little vans going and collecting people and making sure they're safe. We've had great ideas for bus stops. Green roofs, solar panels, air-conditioned pods, Wi-Fi, phone charging ports, or heatwave safety information. I bet everyone in this room has a better idea for a bus stop than a pole by the side of the road. And transforming our cities to make them more sustainable and cooler and installing great bus shelters will tangibly improve the lives of people in hot suburbs. And it can demonstrate to the world that there can be transformative, sustainable change in cities built around cars, that we can cool our urban heat islands, and we can change the way people live. So, what's your idea for cool, fantastic cities? Thank you.